So, how to improve your concentration? So, I always compare concentration to like a muscle. Everyone has its maximum strength. I can train whatever I want. I will never be a bodybuilder, just not built for that. There are individual differences also in the way our brain works. But I think everybody can try to get their maximum strength, but there isn't a training protocol that's scientifically proven. Except just doing it. If you want to read a book, you have to start reading a book again and start slow and build it up. There's one exception of a training protocol of which I think the scientific evidence is strong enough that I can advise it to help your multitasking and your concentration, and that's
Good evening, everybody. Welcome. Welcome at Studium Generale in this lecture hall, and welcome at the lecture on concentration and staying focused in times of distraction. I always hope that once we're here and inside, we really do try at least to concentrate on the speaker and listen. Often it's difficult because we have this thing in our pocket that sometimes maybe rings, or you want to take notes on, or somebody's sending a message that's very important, or you want to play a game, or it's a time where it's very difficult not to get distracted. And of course, at the university where you want to study and concentrate, it makes it harder, all these things. I was talking to the speaker earlier that I remember like preparing for a lecture like this 25 years ago. I would go to the library, collect some books, start reading books, and then I would write a letter that I would send by post, and then I would wait for a week if the professor was going to reply or not, and I maybe would make a phone call, and then send another letter to arrange everything, etc., etc. I wonder why I don't have time for that anymore. On the other hand, a lot of things are more efficient. You know, I look online and I look for speakers, I see short YouTube clips, I dive into articles, I see discussions and blogs, and all very interesting. But again, I do think it is hard to really concentrate, also when it's needed, when you're studying, for instance. So it's very nice and good that we have Stefan van der Stigchel here, who was our guest before. He spoke in Dutch, but that was even before Corona times. He has a very interesting research group, a very interesting lab where he focuses on attention. He'll probably explain about that a little bit more in his lecture. In Utrecht, he's let me have a look, a professor of cognitive psychology and an attention expert at Utrecht University. He also explains the positive effects of taking tech breaks. So he does give some tips to improve our concentration. So he doesn't only study it and looks where it goes wrong or good, but also what we can do about it to be more concentrated. So I hope you learn from this, get some insights. He will talk for about an hour, after which there is time for some questions. We finish around 9:30. Please welcome Stefan van der Stigchel.
Thanks everyone, good evening, thanks for coming. Yeah, there I am. So I'm going to talk about how to improve your concentration and what a concentration is. Hopefully give you indeed some useful tips and tricks, all scientifically correct, at least. That's what I propose. If you have any questions during the lecture, please feel free to ask them. If you don't ask questions during the lecture, don't problem. We have plenty of time afterwards. Let me introduce you to Brian Cullinan. Brian Cullinan works at PricewaterhouseCoopers, and he has a very important job. He had a very important job. He was responsible for handing out the envelopes, giving the right envelopes to the right people during the Oscar evening. So he's tweeting about it, or Xing or whatever. By the time it was still tweeting. Look, I'm heading to the red carpet now. in his briefcase, I have the envelopes with me. 20 minutes, briefcase with me. And he's tweeting again here, best actress, Emma Stone, look, I'm backstage. I have such an honored job. And at this moment in time, Brian makes a huge mistake. And I don't know if some of you remember what happened, but Brian handed out the wrong envelope.
The Academy Award.
He knows it. He has the wrong envelope, has no idea what he should be doing in this situation.
Best picture.
It's the wrong envelope. Yeah, you say it.
La La Land.
No, it wasn't La La Land. This took forever before this was corrected. I think there was no protocol whatsoever for what should have happened if the wrong envelope was handed out. And the day afterwards, PricewaterhouseCoopers released this press release where they take full responsibility. Well, this typical American statement about this will never happen again. And Brian is indeed no longer responsible. He still works at PricewaterhouseCoopers, but he lost this part of his job. I am 100% confident that this mistake wouldn't have been made if Brian wasn't tweeting the whole time. Something definitely so simple as giving the right envelope to the right person at the right moment in time can go horribly wrong when you're not concentrated and you're not focused. So for today, I'm gonna explain what it is, what it means to be focused, and how you can, what the science can tell you about how to improve your concentration. Because I think one could argue that we're in the middle of an attention crisis, perhaps. There's more information around us than ever. Our brain has to deal with all of that information, and it's complicated. Our brain can only process part of the information from the environment. The rest of the information is ignored. And if we are less able to focus than 20 years ago, and I'm going to answer that question later, whether that's actually the case, this is a problem for science, but also for the arts, or I don't know, any job you can think of. I think there isn't a job out there that doesn't require a minimal amount of concentration during a period of the day. So this might also for learning. We also know that when you're learning and you're distracted, information is stored less well and less long compared to situations when you are able to learn without any distractions. And we see that brain areas associated with memory storage, like the hippocampus, simply are less active during periods of distraction compared to periods without distraction. This is why smartphones should be banned at high schools. Who's with me? Okay, yeah, fine. This is all the information we need, right? This is all the evidence we need, at least and on high schools, that learning should be a process where ideally you are not distracted. And this is something that we know for quite some time already. Okay, so this might be a good moment in time to define these things, because I've been mentioning the word attention and concentration, and there are two different things, to me at least. I wrote a book about attention and a book about concentration. So what's attention? Attention is the filtering of information. So when you're outside, you're bombarded with visual information, but also auditory. All our senses are bombarded with information, and our brain cannot process all of that at once. It doesn't need to. I strongly believe that evolution has equipped us with the most efficient system we could possibly have. And apparently we don't need to process all of the information. Only part of the information that's relevant to us, or is made relevant to us, that information is processed. All of the other information is ignored. If you don't pay attention to me right now, I can talk as much as I want. I won't be able to transfer information. Also, I have to pay attention if my mind is somewhere else. If I'm not attentive of what I'm doing right now, I'm thinking about other stuff, then it will be problematic for me to transfer information. So what we're doing right now is we both agree to try to attend for a longer period of time. I made an important statement later on, and I want to rephrase and I want to repeat that, is everything that's not attended is ignored. This is truly correct. Everything you might have ever heard of unattended influencing or subliminal priming, that's all not true. Who has heard of the Coca-Cola story, where you're in a cinema and you shortly flash the word Coca-Cola, people then leave the cinema and buy Coca-Cola? Who's heard that story? Yeah, that never happened. Never happened. The whole story is made up. Look it up on Wikipedia. This time Wikipedia is correct. This was just made up by someone who thought this might be a good way to start a company. And he had a company and he sold that product. But the experiment was never actually performed. If you perform the experiment, it doesn't work. In the Netherlands, we have a very interesting illusion program called Mindfuck. And it's hosted by a person who, Victor Mitz, and he mentioned that he's a doctor and everything he does, he explains it by the brain. But it's all not true, everything he says. Everything when he explains the trick, that's part of the trick. So everyone always believes that, hey, oh, wait, but there was a poster hanging there, and that's why you choose that product. Oh, really? I didn't even see that poster. No, of course, it cannot work. You need attention. If you're not attending information, doesn't have any influence on you. Doesn't mean you cannot influence people, right? If you're walking somewhere and you have to choose between an elevator or the stairs, and you put these things on the floor that guide you to the stairs, that works. Nudging exists, but only when you actually see it and when you attend it. When you don't attend to it, it's not going to influence your performance. So that's one of the things I would like to debunk as a first thing. I'm going to debunk a lot of things. This is one of the first things perhaps that I would like to debunk. Okay, so that's attention. Attention is a filter on the external world, but also on the internal world, right? Also internally, you can attend to some ideas or some thoughts, but not all at once. So also there, the brain has to select. So there's a high competition for our attention. When you're in New York and you're walking on Times Square, you know that you can only attend to one thing at a time, which is therefore very interesting, which commercial wins and which captures your attention. We know, for instance, that faces capture attention, or salient information, like the yellow M is going to capture a lot of attention. So this is a huge industry, right? Because these companies know that if they want to transfer information, they have to capture your attention. Concentration is sustaining that attention for a longer period of time. But attention is all over the place. So concentration is difficult, right? Concentration can be easily broken if attention is rapidly moving around in space, externally and internally. Like, we need to be safe. If now somebody enters the room, it's going to automatically capture your attention, which means that your concentration on me, on the story that I'm telling you, will be gone. This is a reflex. There's nothing you could do about that. People sometimes tell me, I don't want to be distracted. In a sense, you do want to be distracted, right? If now somebody enters the door, it might be evolutionary important to us, it might be potential danger. So therefore, our brain is monitoring the environment all the time, and when there's something new, something that's popping up in the environment, this will automatically capture your attention, and the brain is going to stop doing what it's doing, and will then shift the attention automatically, and then might find out, oh, it's a notification, or it's really something that's dangerous to us. But before the attention is shifted to that location, the brain doesn't know whether it's notifications for a stupid cat movie, or whether it's something that's really threatening. So yes, you want to be distracted, keeps you safe, but you want to be distracted by the right type of information. So concentration is difficult because we need to be safe, our brain is monitoring the world around us, and when there's something happening in the environment, attention will be automatically guided and concentration will be gone. We can only attend to one thing at a time, and I think we sometimes, a little bit overestimate how good we are at attending. Right, a lot of accidents on the road are due to the fact that people are attending the wrong information, and we have less situational awareness of the world around us. This is also a beautiful picture. It's a little bit a sign of the times, although for a radio documentary we were actually finding out what these kids were doing, and they were making a school assignment about the Nachtwacht. But really, were they? Were all of them really doing this particular moment in time, the school assignment, or were they perhaps also looking at TikTok, or we don't know. But officially they were doing a school assignment. Okay, so smartphones. A lot of people know about smartphones and their influence. So I'm not going to talk about it too much because I want to go into the more, for me, more interesting and perhaps also for you more novel information. There's one thing I would like to highlight about smartphones that has to do with notifications. So yes, notifications capture attention, but that's only short, right? If there's a sound in your environment, your attention might be captured, but you're relatively quickly to go back to what you were doing. However, it's the association that you have with the notification that's problematic. For instance, if you now feel your telephone buzzing, It's slightly distracting, but what's more distracting is all the thoughts process that goes into it. Who is sending me the message? You start something that I sometimes call mental itch, right? That you're sort of interested in, who is this? And it's not weird, right? I also have this. When my telephone is buzzing and I'm in my car, I don't want to look at my phone while I'm driving, but when I'm standing in front of the traffic light, I'm also looking, hey, okay, yeah. Because it's new information, and the brain is very fond of new information. It sees it as a reward, and therefore you cannot hold that back. Everyone is just curious. Most of you will be curious when there's a new coming information. We see it in experiments, right? We give participants a very complicated task, and then during the experiment we send them a message, and they don't know it's us. So they hear it, and what we see is the performance drops, but not for a short while, but for a longer period of time. So knowing that you have a message worsens your performance on a specific task. So please think very strategically about which notifications you have on and which notifications you have off. This is a mechanism that our brain is curious. You cannot just say, well, I will start ignoring these notifications. No, that's not going to work. Best thing is just get these notifications out of the way. Okay, so how does attention and concentration work in the brain? Because my hope is always that if I explain you how this all works, this is going to help you implement these rules in your life and then potentially improve your concentration. So I don't think we're doomed. I still think we as humans can actually work against Silicon Valley and perhaps improve our concentration. So what's really going on with our concentration? What's the evidence? Well, according to Wikipedia, we now have a concentration span that's less than a goldfish. Yeah, and this story is also being told a lot, and you can already notice from my voice, this is not true. Wikipedia here is completely wrong. There's no scientific evidence to back up the claim that we have a concentration span that's shorter than 20 or 40 years ago. It doesn't mean it's not true. We simply do not know. There's no scientific evidence. Sometimes I have to disappoint the audience. This is one of the times where I have to disappoint you. Psychology is an interesting field, but a lot of the stuff we simply don't know. And think about it, how would you have known that? So there must be like a data set 20, 30 years ago that looked at the attention span then, and then you could compare it to concentrations. Simply, there's no data. So there are a lot of books being written. Johan Hari wrote a book about the attention crisis, and I looked at the back of the book, and it says that the American teenager can now only focus for 19 seconds. And I was like, okay, where do I get the evidence? You read the book, and the evidence is very, very thin. It's weird, right? It's also a weird idea. If you think about it for a bit longer, how would you measure the attention span? Every individual is different. There's a lot of neurodiversity. It depends on the situation. So the most complicated question you can ask me is, how long can I focus? I don't know. That's also why I don't like the Pomodoro technique. You ever been at the Pomodoro technique? There's an alarm clock. You do it for 25 minutes, and then you take a break for 5 minutes. Why 25? Why 5? It's a good idea to have periods of concentration and intertwine them with periods of taking a break. That's a good idea. But if you're doing great with your focus, should you stop after 25 minutes? Please continue, right? There's no reason to stop if everything's going well. However, if after 10 minutes you already lost your concentration, it's mighty better to take a break. So the huge individual differences. Let me give an example. Say that I won the lottery today. I didn't, but let's assume I won the lottery. And I tell every one of you right now, I'm in a good mood, but I want you to listen to me. So I've got an interesting stories to tell you, and I'm going to ask each and every one of you a question after the talk, and if you have the question correct, I'm going to give you 5,000 euros. What's going to happen with your concentration? No problem. Right? Phones are going to be gone. Everyone is going to grab a pen and paper. Okay, let's do this. Like, 50 minutes, I can make 5,000 euros. No problem concentrating. So is it really true that we're less able to focus than we used to? Or do we no longer dare? Is it a decision that we no longer are able to focus? Because assume a situation where there's no mobile phone in your surroundings, and you're reading a book, and you have the right motivation to read a book. Any one of you can still read a book. Right? It's not. Of course, it might be more complicated after you haven't done it in a while. But hey, when I was young, we had a new television station, Nederland 3. I had 2 television stations, and we had a third station in a knocked me out. Like now, if I'm watching Nederland 3, I have to miss everything that's on Nederland 1 and Nederland 2, which is massive. So I'm missing a lot of the information. So think about the times that we're in right now. There is so enormous amount of information that when you're looking at something, you have to make a conscious decision not to attend the million other types of Nederland 1 channels they're currently out there. So I think a lot of the times we just do not dare. And I'm happy that you guys are here because you actually made a conscious decision to attend me for like 1.5 hours. Thank you for that. And not attend any TikTok movie that might be out there right now. Or I don't know, the Dutch soccer team is playing tonight. Not an important game. There is a debate on who's going to win the election. So look, but you made a good decision. But it's complicated when you are looking at your phone. Okay, so enough about this. Okay, so how does concentration work in the brain? I hope I've convinced you. You can still concentrate. I'm convinced. So when I explain concentration in the brain, I have to talk about working memory. The working memory is the part of the brain that is responsible for executing complicated actions. So not everything taps into the working memory. Things that go automatically, especially motor actions, they tend to not tap into working memory. So for instance, walking or unloading the dishwasher. Some people can knit while they're talking to someone. Some people can play piano while they're talking. So that's are motoric actions that you do quite frequently and they become automatic. They don't tap into working memory. When I had to learn to drive, I asked my dad, can you tell me how I should drive? And he was like, yeah, I don't know actually. He's on the road a lot. So yeah, okay, and then I press the brake and I do this. It was so automatic that he had to consciously think about, I don't even know exactly what to do anymore. And I was learning it. And when I just had my driver's license, everyone had to be quiet in the car. I needed my full focus. And now when I drive, I can have a conversation in the car, except when I have to park, everyone should shut up again, radio goes off, because apparently that still steps into my working memory. But some jobs, how many times you do them, some tasks will always require working memory. Walking, listening, writing, reading, doing a math, a computation. All these things will always tap into your working memory. The working memory can only do one thing at a time, and it's fragile. If something happens in your environment, it will automatically stop doing what you're doing. Working memory will be emptied. Okay, so you could compare working memory to like a workbench where there's specific material on the workbench to perform a task. And when you're done with the task, all the material has to go off the workbench and the new material for the new task has to be on the workbench. This takes time. So every time you switch between tasks, there are some time costs involved. How many? I don't know. Depends on you. Depends on the overlap between the tasks. But everyone will have these switch costs. And there's a higher opportunity that you make mistakes. Because every time you switch tasks, it could be that there's still material on the workbench from your previous tasks. And in the end, it's tiring. Because if you have to switch tasks all the time, this is a cognitive operation, something that requires mental effort, and it will wear you out at the end of the day. So that's why multitasking does not exist. If you define multitasking as doing two things at the same time that both require working memory, that's not possible. It means that you're switching all the time. And that's not always a problem, right? When I had young kids and I was making dinner, I was doing multitasking. I was checking my kids and I was making the dinner and making sure that the kids were safe. And the dinner might have been done a little bit later. It's probably less tasty when I'm multitasking, if that's a possibility in my case anyway. And I might be more tired at the end of the making dinner, but at least this was an ideal situation. So I'm not saying multitasking is always wrong. I'm just saying that in many instances, it might be tiring and it might not be optimal when you're studying or when you're reading a book. This is a situation in which you don't want to multitask. By the way, males and females are just as bad at multitasking. That myth can also be debunked. There's absolutely no evidence to back up the claim that there are differences between males and females. Okay, so it does mean that I can walk and talk at the same time, because walking does not tap into my working memory. I can combine those two quite well. Actually, to admit something to you, I prefer that. I have the easy job tonight. You have to all sit still. I am allowed to move. I have difficulty sitting still. You probably notice for me that I have a lot of motor energy. And for me, sitting still, and it's really complicated if you don't have this, but I know some of you, of my people, in that sense, are in the room, that sitting still is something that requires a little bit of attention. So what happens to a kid with ADHD who you ask, sit still and listen? Might sit still, listening, because that's not possible. For that person, sitting still is something that requires attention and working memory. That's why a lot of people have to move in order to learn. Who's with me? Who has that as well? Yeah, good luck. You have to sit still for another hour. You probably are destroying pens and pencils, or you're moving your feet around, or you have gum. I have a very busy son. And when he had to make his important exam, the CITO, at the primary school, he had gum in his mouth. He was allowed to run around the school 2 times before the exam started. He was sitting on this balloon, and he had gum, and he had a spinner. And then it worked. So, but if he has to sit still, so I also had a dream of a family where you're at the dinner table and then you're having a good conversation, and everyone is sitting at the table until everyone has finished their food. After a couple of weeks, we realized not with this one. So when I talk to him, we have this soft IKEA football. You probably know that. You can buy it for a couple of euros. And he's running around. He's 13. He's running around the room with the ball, and then we can talk to him. It's a weird thing to look at, but it works. If you have a good conversation with me, we start walking. And then I can talk for hours and hours and hours. But if I have to sit still, like in a Zoom meeting, I'm sometimes looking at these people in these Zoom calls, and they're sitting completely perfectly still. You recognize that? Where you're thinking, is this person still alive? Just very relaxed, no motor energy. And I'm there destroying everything. My daughter gives me these awful things that work. She makes stuff, and sometimes it fails, and she gives it to me so that I can destroy it, because she knows else I'll be destroying like gums and yeah. So these people are in your lecture room. These people are in your meetings. These people might be living in your house. And if you don't understand this might be hopefully helping. This is not multitasking, but it's actually beneficial. So when I have a meeting, I have a video call, I prefer having my headset on and I start walking, and then I can be in a meeting because it allows me to move. So we should also design our schools in a way that these kids can also learn. So, and I see it sometimes now on schoolyards where they do a school, they have a lesson, and you can run to the right answer. It's perfect, right? Because these kids can move, and they're so engaged with what they should be doing. Okay, so that's multitasking. So that's not multitasking because it's combining 2 things that actually can be combined. But if you are actually multitasking, the stress system becomes active. And if you're distracted the whole time, we know from studies that people who have been distracted multiple times during a day, at the end of the day had higher stress levels compared to people that were able to work in full focus. In the Netherlands, we have a rule that you're not allowed to have a conversation in the car while holding your phone, while you are allowed to make a call through the Bluetooth car kit. That's weird. There's no difference, and we also know from evidence that there is no difference between the two. So it's the fact that you're having a phone call that's multitasking, and driving is sometimes not multitasking, but sometimes it actually requires your attention when something happens unexpectedly. And we know that a lot of accidents are actually related to the fact that people were having a conversation in the car, on the phone. Okay, so here's a quiz question. Think about this. Why is it that if you have a phone conversation in the car, that's dangerous, while having a conversation with somebody sitting next to you is not problematic? Yeah. Who knows? Yeah, what do you think? I have 2 ideas. Yeah.
One is that it's a bit unnatural that there is like a voice without the person, so you're kind of disoriented by voice in the air.
Yeah.
But I think it's mostly that if there's a passenger and there's a weird situation, that the passenger will also like stop talking because it's a weird situation, and the person on the other side of the line doesn't know that.
Yeah, except my mom.
Can you repeat the answer, because I don't think everybody heard.
Yeah. No, I'll answer. But the person that's sitting next to you also looks at the situation and stops talking. Most of them, at least. So that's at least that's very interesting, right? We see from studies that the conversation in the car actually become more easy in that situation. Okay. Yeah. A lot of people work. Yeah, you have a question. The car situation. Yeah.
They allow using speakers on cars, but not like talking.
Yeah.
So if you talk by the speaker, that rule doesn't apply, right? That someone sees.
No, yeah, so it's a very weird rule. It's actually something we should also if we forbid holding a phone in your hand while driving, we should also forbid talking via the car kit. And a lot of companies actually also have rules that there should be no business calls while you're driving. Okay. So that was exactly my point. Yes, you should also forbid that, definitely, yeah.
Yeah. I'm sorry. So wasn't the problem with like speaking on the phone when we are in the car, the problem that we need, in order to still keep the balance on the wheel, we need to switch the hand, and then the hand is like the most ideal situation is when we hold hands quarter to 10. So then the balance on the wheel allows us more movement. When we hold the phone first, we need to drop the hold, then we need to switch the movement, and then shorter the time for the reaction when something dangerous is happening. So I don't think it was the attention span that was.
Yeah, so they've looked at that, whether sort of the motor action of holding the phone and therefore starting to drive actually influence. The answer is it doesn't matter. It's the chance of getting an accident is the same for when you're holding a phone or when you're talking via the car kit. So that motor action, well, you drive messy, but it's not causing accidents. So it's really the fact that you're talking to someone who's not there, who cannot see, and therefore you're starting to multitask. That effect seems to be strongest than the motor actions associated with holding a phone. There's a question in the back. What would be the what? Yeah, I only hear video call. People, so there's one word in between that people also have to repeat. What's the? And? Oh, what's the difference between normal calling and a video call? You mean, well, not in the car, hopefully you mean, right? But just in general. Yeah. Yeah, so there's a very interesting question about, there's a lot of screens also in cars, right? And there are a lot of phones, and there people are video calling in the car, and you can look at the map. There are a couple of things why looking at a map and having a video call was not problematic, because you can decide yourself when to look. And that's something that people generally can sort of know. So having like a route planner, or so I think there isn't a real difference between when you're having a video call or like a physical or like a phone call when you're driving. Was that your question? No, that wasn't the question. So I'm half deaf, so the microphone should go there.
Yeah, because one of the ideas is you don't see the person, so that's why you have this extra. Yeah. Lack of concentration. If you see the person, if it's a video call.
Yeah, it's not the fact that you don't see the person. It's really the second end. So it's really the fact that this person stops. The conversation simply stops. What's driving the difference? You're still not happy with the answer. Okay. In the car, right? I don't know people do that, but apparently people do that. Okay, yeah. Yeah. Does it exist though? Does it exist a situation where there's a video call that would solve it though, right? So you're envisioning brilliant idea. You're envisioning a situation where you're having a video call with somebody, and the person you're talking to can see where you're driving. Now I got you. Okay. Perhaps that's a solution. You should start a company, perhaps, that enforces that. Yeah, well, perhaps it's better not to have the conversation at all in the car, except perhaps that you're a couple of minutes late, perhaps. But I like your idea. Okay, where were we? Yes. Oh yeah, these open office spaces. Some people were already giggling when I showed this. Who works in an open office space? Oh, poor you. Yeah, I feel for you. There's a lot of scientific evidence backing up the claim that people that work in open office spaces are sick earlier, and when they're sick longer. This is correlation, all right? It's not causality. It's true that this fact is true. We just don't know whether it's due to the distractions. But I've just told you that it's really easy for attention to be distracted, and therefore a lot of people have to, unfortunately, a lot of people have to work in a situation where they're quite easily distracted. Observational studies in these open office spaces have observed that when people stop doing what they're doing, it takes them sometimes 20 minutes to go back to their original task. So it's not saying it's always 20 minutes, but it is definitely a possibility that it might take up to 20 minutes. And it makes sense, right? You're in full focus, somebody starts talking, it might not even be to you, but you stop doing what you're doing, and yeah, it's gonna take some time before you get back to your original task again. So open office spaces are in essence a way to save money when it comes down to like housing, but what does it cost in terms of human capital, so to say? Yeah, you have a question?
Just a really quick question, but is there like an optimal number of people that you can have in an office?
Yeah. Is there an optimal number? It's unfortunately not able to give a scientific answer. 4 to 5 or 6. We do know that the more the worse. That's sort of what shows when it comes down to that number of people getting sick. It doesn't mean it's not possible. I'm not saying that people should not work in open office spaces. So a lot of you work in the university library, right, when you have to study. In essence, the university library is also an open office space. But there are a couple of things that are great about the university library. One of them is try to have a phone call in the university library, right? You'll be kicked out immediately. So there are very strict rules, and there's a lot of places where you can hide because there are a lot of books, and there's not a lot of visual distractions. So there are very strong rules. There's no visual distraction. Also, auditory is generally really nice. That there's not a big echo in the room. But in this open office space, many experience them as a jungle, right? Because people are having video calls in the open office space. There's a printer actually here in the middle of the open office space that you might already have detected. So it's very important to think about how you design the work environment. Sometimes I'm invited at companies to look at how they design their open office spaces. Sometimes this is really hilarious because I just went to a large bank and they said, look, we listened to you. We made a separate room where people can focus, and we just put a couple of tables there. There's nothing else, so there are no distractions. That's of course wrong because there wasn't any way to hide. Everybody just stood up, would immediately capture attention. It was surrounded by glass, so everyone walking passed by. So you really should design your open office space as a university library, and also nudge people that they know what type of behavior. So you know what behavior is expected of you in the university library. So I've been told, I haven't been there, would like to go there in Groningen. This is where the tax office, so the Belastingdienst, is located. And they've told me that they've got a separate area where you can concentrate. When you enter that area, you have to open a very door, like a large door. That really, like, you have to open the door, and it's difficult to open the door. And then you walk in, and there's carpet. So it's really like, this is a different area, right? There's something different is expected of me right now. This is the problem with the silence areas in trains. They're designed the same way as the other areas. So I'm walking with my friends, I walk into there, start talking, and all of a sudden I realize that, oh shit, I'm in a silence area, I'm a stilte coupé. But it was very difficult for me to detect it, and it doesn't trigger that behavior automatically. So yes, if there are good rules, if the design is accurate, it's still possible, but unfortunately, in many cases, these open office spaces are designed in an awful way. So we said people should perhaps start working from home, right? And then COVID hit, and then all of a sudden we were all working from home and studying from home, and we realized that there are also problems with working from home. One of the things that people experience is a lack of motivation while working from home, right? You're at home. That's why students go to university library, to see other people work, to meet their friends. When I was working from home, I miss my colleagues. I'm an extrovert person. I like talking to my colleagues. It's one of the reasons why I go to my lab, is because I want to see everyone and have fun at the lunch table. And also, it has to come down to the switch costs, is that when you go from your home to your work or wherever you're going, that takes time. And that time has a function, because you can start preparing for what you're doing, what you're supposed to be doing, what you're going to do. And at the end of the day, you're done and you go home again. So that travel time allows you to deal with these switch costs. When you work from home, you don't have that possibility. So what I always advise people to do is to go outside, take a walk, introduce travel time again, and then you're home, you're like, okay, now I'm going to work, and you're ready. Because you cannot expect from yourself to be done with your morning ritual, open your laptop and start working immediately or studying immediately. That's not possible. So you need to deal with these switch costs, and this is one way. By the way, video calls should not take 1 hour. They should last a lot shorter, because when you have a physical meeting, you go from one room to the other, and this couple of minutes and just leaving a room already empties your working memory. Therefore, at high schools, my son, when he went to the first year of high school, they decided that the first year students stay in their room and that the teachers come to them. That's a bad idea. Let these kids move to a different room, because then their working memory is emptied. They can also move, that's also nice. But if you stay in the same room the whole day, you have these switch costs that you have to deal with, and you have to switch tasks, and oh, we're doing French, oh, we're doing English. But that's complicated. We also know that, by the way, studying in where you have the same room where you have your exam is also beneficial, but that's a whole different story. Okay. By the way, something that's also I should have mentioned, and that's always an interesting question, so let me answer that, is listening to music. So who works or studies always with music on? Yeah. Who cannot do that? Nice, eh? Neurodiversity. 50-50, I think we're here. So that's true. So for me, listening to music is not an active task. I don't listen. I don't actively listen. I can ignore it. It's a wall of sound around me that I can ignore, and actually makes that I'm less distracted, because if people start talking or there's something happening in the environment, it's drawn in a noise. So that's nice. There might also be people here, and half of you are like that. No, they say, when I hear music, I start listening. I cannot ignore it. I love music so much or whatever, it's just something I cannot do. That's also correct. So for you, it would be multitasking. So it depends, of course, also on the type of music that you listen to. When you're Dutch, you should not listen to Dutch music. That's also a matter of taste, but that's a whole nother discussion. Sorry, that's awful. I forget that one. But music in your own language is, of course, problematic, like attention-grabbing music. But without Too Unlimited, I would not have been able to get my high school diploma. Yeah.
I'm a software engineer.
Software engineer, yeah. Yeah, thank you.
Hi, I'm a software engineer.
Yeah.
And what I notice is that I can't read text or write text when listening to music with lyrics.
Yeah.
But when I'm fully focused in code, then I can sing along while being focused on the code. Like, how does that work?
Is coding a little bit automatic for you? Is it something that you have to think about more extensively than writing?
It's semi-automatic,
yeah.
Maybe?
That might be the reason. So when I'm doing something that's relatively complicated, I can do it with music. When it's really complicated, like parking a car, music goes off. So it's the effect, because it still requires some mental effort to ignore the music. For me, it's a cost-benefit, it helps me. But when it becomes really complicated, it's problematic. So that's probably, coding is something that you enter a semi-automatic phase, as you say it yourself. Yeah. Yeah. Even more tools. No, unfortunately, I wrote a book which has 50 tips for... No, so what I try to do, and it's a good question, so thank you. What I try to do is, by explaining the mechanisms, you could select your own tips and tricks. So the fact about the walking and about designing your environment. Unfortunately, I cannot give you the ideal tip, so my trick is always to explain the mechanism, and then it's up to the audience to sort of find their way giving the tips. There will be a couple of more. I will highlight them a bit more specifically, but I cannot become more concrete than I am right now because every individual is different. That makes it a little bit complicated. I cannot give you the ideal tip, but the mechanisms are the same for all of us. So unfortunately, if I disappoint you, then I simply have to. But I'll do my best. There's another question, yeah. Yeah.
Frequencies that are supposed to stimulate certain brainwaves that actually has a proven effect on concentration or relaxation or other functions.
Yeah, so binaural beats, do they help? There is no evidence that it's beneficial. It could, so no, there is no evidence. It does mean that it might work for some people if it makes them, if that's something they can ignore. So some people also listen to rain while they're working. So it's sort of the same, but there's no additional evidence that it works better than Mind to Unlimited. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Wait for the mic. Yeah.
Thank you. We said that there is some time required for task switching. Can we reduce by practicing this time?
Yeah, can you practice task switching? A little bit. You can train your concentration. I'll explain that a bit later. Yes, there are ways to reduce those costs, but they will never come down to zero.
So I'm saying that because people with ADHD are very famous about they cannot like stay at a task given for a lot of time, and they are very prone to task switching. So is it better to work on like staying on a given task focused or work on the task switching?
I think those two are very, very related. If you improve your concentration, and I'll give you some ways to do that later, this will also allow you to multitask better. So this comes hand in hand.
Okay,
yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah. Okay, so being connected is also a thing, right? A lot of companies, a lot of people want to stay connected if they're working from home. So it's really a good idea to talk about, so for instance, according to me, WhatsApp is not for work. WhatsApp should really be private, and you can make joke on WhatsApp. But for me, it's not part of my work routine, because when I take a day off, I really want to have a day off and not be sort of distracted by all types of WhatsApp messages from work. And a lot of companies, this is a huge problem. So that's something to think about. I have the slide on music. Okay. So how do you improve your concentration? So I always compare concentration to like a muscle. Everyone has its maximum strength. I can train whatever I want. I'll never be a bodybuilder, just not built for that. There are individual differences also in the way our brain works, but I think everybody can try to get their maximum strength, but there isn't a training protocol that's scientifically proven. Except just doing it. If you want to read a book, you have to start reading a book again and start slow and build it up. There's one exception of a training protocol of which I think the scientific evidence is strong enough that I can advise it to help your multitasking and your concentration, and that's mindfulness. Yes, there is enough scientific evidence, I believe, that mindfulness is good for your concentration and your focus. And if you think about what mindfulness is, it also kind of makes sense. So let me give you my view on mindfulness. I'm not a guru or whatever, but mindfulness is attending to something externally or internally. And when you notice your attention starts to wander, you detect that and you bring it back to what you're doing. That's concentration. So one could argue that mindfulness is concentration, but then boiled down to its bare essence. So it is concentration. It's not the same as taking a break. Some people say, well, when I'm having a break, I do mindfulness. I don't think that's a break. It's relaxing, but reading a book is also relaxing. It doesn't mean that your brain actually comes to a complete stop. I will explain later what that means. So yeah, I think if you're now thinking, I want to improve my concentration and mindfulness is not something for me, it might actually be something for you. It's complicated, it's devastatingly complicated, everyone has that. But it makes you very aware of what it means to be distracted. So what I've learned from mindfulness, that's my personal experience, is that I've learned that when I have to attend to something, my internal ego starts talking and starts telling me awful things or positive things or negative things. But this is also happening when I'm focusing. So it makes me conscious of what's happening and also conscious of, okay, I can ignore it. I could also not attend to all of these internal thoughts, but I could also just decide not to attend. When you're worrying a lot, this is also a trick, right? I'm not saying this is the trick, but a lot of clinical therapists that focus on people that worry and are a lot of negative internal thoughts are actually training people to decide consciously not to attend to it, but to attend to something else. And I have a history of panic attacks. This is what helped me when my ego started talking about, oh, something awful is going to happen. I decided not to attend it and to attend to something else. And that's also why mindfulness is in many ways very efficient. So I'm quite skeptical when I read papers. So, but here I think I can make the claim that it's quite convincing. And good sleep. This is an open door, but I'm going to kick it in. We know that people sleep shorter, especially adolescents sleep longer than 20, 30 years ago. And this, of course, has to do with the mobile phone and social media. This has nothing to do with the blue light emitted by the screen. That's what a lot of people think. Yes, blue light keeps you awake, but the blue light emitted by your phone is simply too low to actually influence you. So that's merely those lights that actually influence the blue light. It's of course the apps. The apps are designed to keep your attention and arousal so high that the difference between where you are and where you should be going is simply too large. So a trick would be is if you have sleeping problems and if you want to improve your concentration, is to really make sure that there is a large period of time before you go to sleep that you get this out of your life. Can you then read a book? Well, it depends. Right? It depends on what it does to you. If you, for instance, once every month I play a pop quiz, and it always make me very excited, and I love that. And when I go home, I know that I cannot sleep. It's going to take me 1 hour to 2 hours to actually fall asleep because I'm just too awake. And so it really depends what it does to you. Therefore, the rewinds of the comedy show Friends, it really increases shortly before people fall asleep. Makes sense, right? That a lot of people they watch an episode of Friends and then they nicely fall asleep. Okay, then periods offline. It's weird to talk about concentration and talk about the other side of concentration, but they're so important that I'm gonna discuss this in some detail. Because how interesting a book might be, sometimes your eyes go over the text, but there's absolutely no information intake anymore, right? It's done. Because this is also an illusion. The fact that you can go to like a small hut somewhere where there's no Wi-Fi and you can work there for hours, that's also an illusion, right? After a while, it's done. The concentration is gone. You can design your way your environment in a perfect way, but just like my iPhone at 11 o'clock in the morning, the battery's gone, and you need to recharge your battery again. And this has to do with the arousal curve. This is a simplification, but bear with me. If you are very aroused, so have high stress levels, very awake, you start to make mistakes, performance goes down. But this also, when you're under-aroused, when you're not motivated, when you're tired, when you are not inspired, you're easily distracted, you start multitasking, you become more tired, and you run into a negative cycle. So the ideal performance is when the optimum arousal, that's not too much arousal, but definitely also not too little arousal. So therefore, ideally, when you notice that your mind starts to wander, we'll talk about that, then you need to take a break. And preferably a break away from technology, right? Because when you're interacting with technology, your brain still doesn't take a break and you're still actively attending somewhere. That's also why mobile phones should be completely banned from schools. Also while taking a break. Yes, I am very much occupied with this question. So it's not also during breaks, preferably also on schools. You do something that doesn't actively engage your working memory. Scientific evidence shows that when people take a break in an environment where there are no attention-grabbing stimuli, like an attention like nature or a park environment, people are performing better after that break compared to when they took a break in a busy city center. Because here, your attention cannot take a break. And it's interesting to be inspired by geniuses and how they spend their day. So these are these types of graphs that can be filled in, and it's from a book called Daily Rituals. It's really interesting. This is by Darwin. This is how Darwin had his every day. This is how his day looked. The cool thing about Darwin and about these people was that they had so much control over their life, they could design their day in an ideal way. I know many of you can't, I also can't, but at least I can be inspired by a day that has clear blocks of concentration and focus, intertwined with periods where I take a break. And you see that these people take a lot of breaks in nature. Darwin started with a short walk, then had a breakfast alone, preparing for what he should be doing, having a period of focused work of 1.5 hours, then he'd read some email or whatever, read some personal mail, another 1.5 hour of focus, another walk, and a third walk in the evening, but clear blocks. If you could design your perfect day, tonight grab pen and paper and make this drawing for you. How would you like to design your day? And do you actually take enough walks and take breaks where you do nothing? Here Tchaikovsky, also in the morning a walk, after the lunch, a long walk break. He only composed 2 times 2 hours. Now one could argue, that's only 4 hours, that's not a lot. But still, when was the last time that you had 4 hours of full focus without any distractions during a day? If you design your day like Tchaikovsky, you potentially could. Here's Beethoven. Beethoven was a legend in many ways. He could compose for hours and hours and hours, but also he also needed a long, vigorous walk at the end of the day, where he took some pen and paper. I'll tell you later on why he needed pen and paper while he was making that long walk. But also look at his morning ritual. He prepared breakfast by counting 60 beans for his perfect cup of coffee. This is something that I've started to call an attention ritual, something that you do before you engage in a long period of focus to clear your working memory. So this could be you taking a walk, I don't know, cleaning the dishwasher or whatever, or feeding the rabbits, something that prepares you for your upcoming task, your attention ritual. Okay, so what happens in the brain when you're not doing anything? When you give someone, just lie in the scanner and look at the brain activity while they're not actively doing a task. Well, this was invented by Reichel in St. Louis, Washington University, St. Louis. He put people in the scanner and he asked them, okay, do nothing. It's weird for us psychologists, we're always interested in behavior, and he was sort of interested in the other side. And he discovered a brain network associated with not actively being engaged in a task. And this was replicated now numerous times, and it's one of the most heavy studied brain networks in the brain, and it's called the default network. And I don't want you to remember which brain areas are associated with default network. I only want you to remember that these are different brain areas compared to the areas associated with focus attention. So this is a different brain network. So one could argue that you're in 2 possible states in any moment in time. Either you're concentrating and focused, or you're in your default network. And what happens to your mind? What's presented to your mind starts to wander. Mind wandering, daydreaming. I don't like daydreaming, but I think mind wandering is better because it explains better what's actually happening in your mind, right? You're traveling to the future and the past. These are the moments that your mind, that you're thinking about your holiday or about that relationship, or you're on your bike, you're taking a shower, you're not actively having a task. And then you start these periods of mind wandering. And mind wandering is important for a number of reasons. First of all, and it's probably something you've guessed already, it allows for your concentration to regain its strength again. So when you're mind wandering, as William James called it, the stream of consciousness, it allows your attention network to regain its strength again. So it's beneficial for your concentration that you mind wander frequently. And it's good for your creativity. Mind wandering is associated with creativity. People tell me the best ideas arise when you take a shower. I don't know whether that's the best ideas, but there is actually there is no evidence. This is just an hypothesis, but it's an interesting hypothesis that the ideas that you get during mind wandering are of a different nature compared to the ideas that you get when you're heavily focused. So all of a sudden you have an insight. Hey, I found it. I found the solution. That could potentially happen when you're mind wandering, and because there's a different brain network involved, in mind wandering compared to periods of focus, it might, but the creativity that you have during mind wandering is of a different nature. How could you ever prove that? I don't know, but it's an interesting idea. So it's good for your concentration, it's good for your creativity, and I'm now starting to sound like a real psychologist. This self-reflection that you do during mind wandering, it might also have some positive insights. Yes, you have a question?
But when you're mind wandering, aren't you focusing on the thoughts that you have at the moment? Isn't it focusing as well?
Mind wandering could develop into focus. So it's not as black as white, I pretend here. So think about your mind wandering, and all of a sudden there's a thought, and you step into that thought and you start thinking about it actively. That moment you're no longer mind wandering. So mind wandering could develop into periods of focus. So, but in many situations, these things sort of are serially, right? You have period of mind wandering and period of active focus. But for instance, when you're biking, there are many periods during that ride in which your mind starts to wander without you actually noticing it. But it could develop into focusing, absolutely. Yeah. There's a problem with mind wandering. We don't like it that much. So there's a study a couple of years ago who found that moments in which your mind wandering are associated with less happiness compared to periods in which you're actively performing a task. There was the title, "A Wandering Mind is an Unhappy Mind." And a lot of people recognize themselves, me too, right? I'm not always happy when I'm on my bike, right? I'm worrying a little bit about stuff. I might be mad at some people at my work. These things pop up when you have troubles. These things come up while you're mind wandering. They did an experiment where they have participants in an empty room with only like a machine that could apply shocks. And what happened, on average, after 12 minutes, a participant has applied a shock. So if you're alone in a room and there's a machine that applies shock, after 12 minutes you start interacting with that machine. So the moral of the story is we prefer giving ourselves a shock that we're alone than we're alone with our own thoughts. This was a Nature paper. I'm not sure what to think of it, but it is sort of a sign that what's the most horrible thing people do is have a train ride between Utrecht and Maastricht and forget your phone. Right? All of a sudden you're like, now I have to think for 2 hours or be alone with my thoughts. So a lot of people don't actually prefer that. So what they do is they're standing in line for the supermarket, nothing to do, bloop, bloop, and they have their phone out. Of course, right? This is also a habit. And it also stops your daydreaming and your mind wandering immediately. So my advice is to engage in a little bit more mind wandering during the day, to improve your concentration, to perhaps help your creativity. And you cannot actively attend the whole day. You have to build in those short walks that these geniuses built into their day, because you cannot focus all day. Your brain needs to take a break. So if you're in the end of the day, if you're mentally tired, it probably could potentially be a sign that you were too engaged during the day and there weren't enough periods of mind wandering. And this is gonna break in, right? The moment you're coding or you're reading a book and all of a sudden you start to mind wander. That's a signal that the balance between concentration and mind wandering might be a bit off. Yeah?
Is there a connection between mind wandering and flow states where you're completely lost in whatever task you're doing at the moment? Paradoxically, you're super focused, but
Yeah.
feels like you don't have to effortfully think about it.
Yeah, so flow states, that's a very interesting question, a very intriguing question. We know also that they happen. Do you have them a lot? Do you have a lot of flow states? Yeah, I hear it also, people also in the autistic spectrum, they tell me that, yeah, I can really be hyper-focused. So it's some people, I have it when I play tennis, I can be in a state of flow, also when I'm riding. So it's difficult to study, but what we think is flow. I didn't bring that slide, but it has to do with the circles of attention, is that your working memory is completely occupied with your task and there's nothing else. So I wouldn't say it's mind wandering, I would mostly say it's the opposite side of mind wandering. So it's a moment where your concentration is, you have become the task, right? There is no future, there is no past, there's only the present. And I think with mind wandering, you're time traveling, while in a moment of flow, you're completely in the now. So I would say it's the anti-mind wandering. It's the state of hyper-focus that we might all be looking for. By the way, from coders, we know that hyperfocus might actually be a bad idea. There's some evidence showing that if you're too hyperfocused, you might also be solving something that you should not be solving at all. So you're completely lost in a local minimum, so to say. So I've talked to people at the police in The Hague, where people in the autistic spectrum, they look at these camera images the whole day, and they can get into a hyperfocus, and they take notice of that from each other, and they get each other out of the hyperfocus, because it's very tiring. And it's devastating for their mental health to be hyperfocusing too much. So we still don't really know whether hyperfocus is a good idea and whether it's not too much of attention. Okay, so mind wandering might not be the most positive experience. Some of you might relate to that, but it is actually a good idea to engage in this mind wandering. Yeah. Wait for the mic, because else, sorry, I'm deaf on the left side.
Most of the time, people say before they go to sleep that they get like many ideas.
Yeah.
What are the causes of this?
Yeah, so that might be that mind wandering. So shortly before you go to sleep, you're not actively engaged in a task. Then you take a break. It's daydreaming, right? So it's also, if you look at the alpha waves in the brain, it is the period where your brain takes a break, and therefore the overlap with sleep is also not an all or none thing, right? So it's definitely possible that when you're actually starting to fall asleep, your brain takes a break, you're no longer actively performing a task. So this could be this mind wandering, and therefore different ideas start to pop up because you become very associative with all the different areas in your brain. So that might be the explanation there. Okay, couple of minutes. Why do we have a default network? I think this audience can handle this part of the story. It's an interesting idea. When you are not actively engaged in a task, and there would be no default network, you all know that the brain fires chaotically, right? Neurons start firing, so it's complete chaos if there's no system holding it all together. So the idea is when you're not actively in a task, there should be some other system holding the brain together, else you get chaos. Is there evidence? Yeah, psychedelics. When you get psychedelics, the default network shuts off. What you then start to get is hallucinations. That's not something you want in daily life too much, and therefore you get the idea that you start to hallucinate because the brain starts to freak out and starts firing chaotically. There's some clinical value to that potentially, but you don't want it happening during the day. So one argument of why we have a default network might be that it's actually a way of controlling the brain and not getting into complete chaos. There are also certain psychiatric disorders associated with a lower activity of the default network, and those disorders are associated with hallucinations. Okay, cool idea, I think. Okay, creativity, I've done that. Yeah, so I think my attention curve is almost done. So I'm gonna skip a couple of slides, but they were not so exciting nonetheless. So yeah, people can still have Netflix, Netflix changed how we listen to music. Gaming, we can learn from gaming that people can concentrate very well. What's so cool about gaming? A lot of rewards, so reward yourself. You always perform at your optimal performance, so that's ideal, difficult in classrooms, but doable. A lot of visual stimulation. So children with ADHD can game just as well as children without ADHD, so that's something we can actually be inspired from. So I don't think that evolution is, I know that evolution is not so quick that all of a sudden we have a brain that is no longer able to focus. It's just our environment has changed. Hey, but we have control over our environment. So my hopes is not positive that we don't end up like Brian Cullinan. Thank you for your attention. I have some books. Will be after the lecture if you want to then. Yeah, but the Dutch books, sorry.
For some questions too.
Yeah.
I was wondering, you hear about people saying, yeah, when I've worked hard and concentrated all day, I come home, I look at YouTube, and that makes me relax.
Yeah. There's nothing wrong with being in a relaxed state. It's that, unfortunately, the balance needs to be correct. So I would not say go home and look at YouTube all evening. If it makes you relax, YouTube is okay. But preferably after a couple of minutes, you leave YouTube and you go outside and you take a walk to actually engage in that mind wandering. So a couple of months I realized that I listened to too many podcasts. I always have headphones on when I'm outside, always. Because I listened to music a lot, but I started to engage in listening to podcasts a lot. And I noticed that this was interfering with my mind wandering. So I realized I should cut down on the podcast, because this is again me engaging in this listening to podcasts. So yes, it makes you relaxed, but reading a book is also relaxed. But I think it's very important to keep a balance, that there are periods during your day, and I cannot tell you the exact numbers, every brain is different, sorry about that, but there should be enough hours during the day in which you start to mind wander, because then if you start reading the book, mind wandering will kick in, or you have difficulty falling asleep, or you're too tired, so the right balance. But I'm not against social media too much, right? It's just, the balance needs to be correct.
And is it correct if you say, like, in this mind wandering, you could also have lots of worries?
Yeah.
So, like, depressed people, are they often in this default mode? And
yeah, we know that, for instance, PTSS is associated, so post-traumatic stress disorder, is associated with higher activity in the default network compared to the concentration network. Of course, if the worrying becomes too much, then I understand that you want to get away from that mind wandering. There is actually some new clinical studies showing, and I kind of like the idea, and hopefully you can also appreciate that idea if I tell you, is that people have a lot of worries, should actively worry 1 hour during the day. Piekeruurtje. And there's actually evidence showing that these worries are gonna come, nonetheless, right? So why not have a period during the day in which you just let them come? And then you know that if you're worried, okay, I'm gonna worry about that tonight or tomorrow. And I've read some papers showing that might actually improve your concentration, because it's gonna, like, I think during COVID many of us had worries and had difficulty concentrating. So if you have these troubles in your life, they're gonna interfere with your concentration. So you could also just either seek help, of course, take these tips and advices, much better than the tip that I give you right now. The only reason why I'm saying that is there are actually techniques that potentially could bring that balance back. But when mind wandering becomes worrying too much, that's of course not good for you, but it helps me knowing that a certain extent of worrying during mind wandering is something that apparently a lot of people have, and that's okay.
Okay, there was lots of questions. We start here.
Yeah, thank you. Do you know what the relationship between the concentration in the individual and social functioning? Because I'm a teacher and I have discovered that the social functioning, in my opinion, is becoming, my students are less attentive to, interested in their fellow students. You understand?
I absolutely understand what you mean. It's something I worry on a personal level as well. I've also got teenagers running around at home, and I get the impression that they're less communicative, as we were, and that they're reading less books, and they are less socially. It's difficult to measure again, and it's a matter of opinion. When I ask my son, but I think it's problematic that you don't read books, he says, I don't. I say, I think it's problematic that you're gaming a lot and not interacting with your friends. His answer is, but I don't. So it's complicated. I agree with you, but it might also be generational difference. That is just something we have to accept. But I agree with everything you said. There is definitely a relationship. If you're not able to read a book anymore, it will be difficult when you're older to get that ability. And when you don't learn on an early... So he tells me at high schools, at lunch breaks, they're not talking to each other. Everyone's at their phone. And yeah, but he says, yeah, what can I do? The rest is also on their phone. So there's no one to have a conversation with. Unfortunately, we don't know what the results of that will be in 10 to 20 years from now. But I do think jong geleerd is oud gedaan, as in many cognitive functions. If you haven't trained it at an early age, it might be difficult to get that capacity later on. But again, science is too slow for that, unfortunately. Yeah.
You mentioned that travel time is important,
Yeah.
and that your son now, he sits in one room and the teachers come in.
Yeah.
But why wouldn't a break where the children can go out of the classroom for 5 minutes
Yeah.
work the same? And why would you need to go to a different class?
Yeah, so you could potentially just go outside of the class, but the thing is they don't, because they might as well just sit still and the teacher is coming in and out. So then it's not something that goes naturally. When you have to move from one room to the other, but also then it happens at least every hour. I also mentioned, and I think there is enough evidence to make that claim, is that when you're learning something in a separate room, it's easier to learn French in your French room, in the class locale, than in an English room. So because when we remember information, we remember it also spatially. Therefore, when you're I was in the same hotel as I was a couple of years ago, and all of a sudden memories came back. Because a lot of these memories are stored in spatial nature. So I think especially early on, it might actually be beneficial to learn in different rooms. So those are actually two reasons then. The moving at least happens, we know that it happens, and it might improve learning abilities. Yeah.
So regarding regarding what you said about putting aside time for worrying, as well as the mind-wandering thing, what are your thoughts on journaling specifically in a stream of consciousness kind of manner? Do you think that would have the same positive effects as mind-wandering, or would it be engaging your working memory too much? No. I think journaling is just writing down a sort of stream of consciousness, what's happening, what's going on. This might be, if you do it in a way, I can imagine that it's a sort of a way to induce the mind wandering and to stay in the state of mind wandering. So I definitely think that could work, as long as you just let these associations pop up and write them down. I think that could potentially help in getting that mind wandering mode. Again, no data to back that up, but if it's associative and creative, then it's definitely a possibility.
I have a question to understand a little bit better from your perspective how social media are designed. Because you very briefly mentioned the fact that we continue to get visual information, always new. So this activates your brain, always curious. But on the other hand, I think it has a minimal cost. It has a minimal cost. Like it would be much more costly probably to read a book or to engage in something else. So this combination could potentially be addictive. What a comment about that? What do you think? And one very short about that. From your perspective, father and attention expert, at what age your kids would get their first smartphone?
Oh, okay.
If you want to answer, of course.
Okay, let me the first question, because that's easier for me, so I can stick to science. So addiction might be a complicated word, because some people want to reserve addiction for situation that is really associated with biochemical stuff, right? Where like neurotransmitters, where you start trembling when you don't get the thing you're addicted to. But however, if gaming is also sometimes considered an addiction, I think social media is in that same corner. So yes, it's addictive, and it has to do with the reward that you receive all of the time. It has to do with the continuous flow that's of visual and auditory and tactile information. And realize, like, I haven't checked, I'm on one social media platform, I have to admit, the rest I'm not. But I know when I open that app, the information that they're going to be presented to me is going to be ideally suited for me. It's exactly what I'm interested in. You all have that promise right now in your pockets. So I think that all those combinations and the fact that rewards that are unpredictable are more addictive than rewards that are predictable, that is problematic, right? These notifications, you don't know who it is, and that aspect makes it very, very addictive. When should you start getting a mobile phone? It's a very complicated question. We started around 10, and that might sound early, but we also have to keep a nice atmosphere in the house, so to say. And the discussion with the kids is something. But what I do is, as an attention expert and as a father, I have this conversation. I talk about all this stuff. I invite everyone to have this conversation. The fact that my both kids are very busy in terms of motor activity is something I think we try to solve in that way. But I don't want to have a story against social media. It's just dealing with it in the right way. So not studying while your phone is in the same room. I think those basics, I think everyone could potentially implement. And then I don't have too much against social media. Yeah.
Is there an effect of temperature or light intensity or light spectrum on the ability to concentrate?
No, there is no real evidence for like colors or lights or temperature. It's very personal, and but there are no, to my knowledge, no general principles that holds that would really show that attention is better with certain temperatures or certain colors or certain light intensities compared to others. Might be true, but I haven't seen any convincing evidence of that. Yeah, my book cover. Yeah, it's yes, but it wasn't designed for that specific reason. No. It was designed to show the trouble and the difficulties of our time, so to say. Yeah, there is no general bigger thought behind this. No.
You mentioned earlier that Beethoven carried a piece of paper with him, and you'd get back to letting us know what
because of the creativity. Yes, thank you. Yes, so he always carried a pen and paper because while he was walking, he might have a good idea, and then you want to write it down. So mind wandering is good for your creativity. And when you take a break, when you take a walk, I always have something with me to write stuff down, or I take a voice memo. Because I might actually get a good idea during mind wandering, and that's also why he always took a pen and paper to write down these ideas. I forgot that. Thank you. Yeah.
Yes, thank you very much for your talk. Very interesting. There was a lot of focus on keeping focus on specific desired tasks, and doing that by training it and by removing distractions.
Yeah.
Sometimes people have people that have tinnitus, a phantom sound.
Yeah.
They are distracted by something they can't remove.
Yeah.
And then what they basically do is they perform another task.
Yeah.
So they are no longer distracted by it. But as soon as this task ends,
it's back.
It comes back.
Yeah.
And then the trick is, how do you get the attention away from this sound?
Yeah, I think they also try mind wandering, right? So they also tinnitus is a very complicated manner, and I think a lot of people don't even want to talk about it because now they might hear that again, right? It is. I think many of the training actually involves attention, and so one of the things that I know that there has been some evidence for is that mindfulness works. So attending to something else, which could be your breath or could be your heartbeat or could be something the internal world, the external world, just to get the attention of the tinnitus. But there isn't, unfortunately, something that could help. But I've seen that mind wandering has some beneficial effect there. Mindfulness. But no, there's no perfect solution except trying to ignore it and not attend to it. But I know how complicated that might be. Yeah.
Hi. So first of all, thank you for this lecture. Very interesting.
Thanks.
I was curious about something. So we touched upon it a little bit in the other questions too. And I know it's pretty difficult to study, as you already mentioned. But I was wondering, what is your opinion or your educated guess on the effect of very small little children, like babies, being very plastered to the iPad or TikTok, for instance?
Yeah.
I'm wondering what your ideas are.
So I'm gonna give the educated guess because every evidence that's out there is correlational, right? People that multitask, children that multitask perform worse at school, but because they perform worse at school, they multitask. So it's you can never show this causation. Causality is gonna go really off here. I do think if I have to take the educated guess, I come back to the Dutch saying, jong geleerd is oud gedaan. If you have experienced early on difficulties with concentration and focus, I think the chances are really high that you have more problems when you have later on. If you're bombarded with visual input when you're young, this is also, you get used to that a lot, right? If I look at reruns of my children's show when I was young, it's hilarious how slow that is, right? So I think also we learn children that they have to get used to all this fast pace of information. So therefore, I think the fact that there's no scientific evidence does not mean that we should not take action. So therefore, a smartphone ban at high schools, primary schools, is something we have to get started. The GroenLinks, Dutch National Party, so the Green Party in Europe, they now have a law in development that's going to be voted on relatively soon, where they ban certain things from social media. So for instance, the infinite scrolling, something that has to be stopped, that a movie starts playing automatically when you get to see it. So there are really things that we could do, we could regulate, and I think we should not wait for all the scientific evidence to roll in because we're taking a huge risk here. Yeah.
Coming to something that we are all probably going to do later is sleep. And
sleep, yeah.
Sleep, and the question is if after waking up our brain is in a different state which allows us to concentrate better. So maybe, yeah, that would be my question. If then, for example, looking at a phone first thing in the day is even worse than in the middle of the day, for example. So is there like a difference?
Yeah, I think it's a very good question. I have to think about it. Yes, I think so. Of course, when you wake up, your attention network has sort of regained all its strength again, right? So it's completely all the afvalstoffen, so all the dirt chemical dirt is out of all these brain regions. So when you then start engaging with your phone, your point is then, might you be looking at it longer because you've got all your focus now, and then you won't get tired. It might be. On the other hand, I also feel like looking at your phone doesn't really tire the concentration up to a point where you will voluntarily say, my concentration is gone, I'm done. Because it's like gaming, right? So it's so easy to attend, it's almost difficult to ignore it. I really wonder where there is a difference in how long people can look at their social media when you wake up compared to shortly before you go to sleep. Given that it's so attention grabbing, it might be actually more easy to disengage early in the morning because you still have some social will to actually get stuff done. It's an interesting study. I can see both sides.
Yeah, all the way in the back.
Hi, thank you for the talk. You mentioned about having the kind of ritual before, for example, if we work from home, to go for a walk before starting the walk, so to get ready for the concentration or for the walk. But is this ritual something that is it maybe time dependent, so it has to take longer time, or can it be something also instantaneous, so just very quick ritual? So is it time dependent in a way that I have to have the time to get ready for the walk, or is it about having even a really small ritual just to...
Depends on how occupied your working memory is. So for instance, when I take an exam and students come in late, I always say, well, don't start answering the questions immediately because you're still too worried about that you were too late. So I ask them, okay, take a break before. And I always say, okay, just think about when you think your working memory is completely empty and when you can start interacting with the text. So it's an overlap. There's not an ideal time point. There's an overlap. So it's determined by the current content of your working memory, how extensive it's occupied. It is, however, a ritual that if you do that specific ritual frequently, you might consider it being conditioning. So for instance, there wasn't Pavlov, but the other behavioralism, Skinner. So Skinner is the inventor of behaviorism, so everything that has to do with conditioning. He's one of the inventors of behaviorism. And when he started to concentrate, he rang a bell. Bing. And he thought that if I do that every time, the moment I hear the bell, I will automatically start concentrating. I don't know whether that works, but I can imagine that if there's a certain ritual that you always do, when a specific music that you listen to, for instance, that those associations might automatically help you because your brain now associates that ritual or that moment in time with concentration.
If we, I'm going to finish with that question later. There's one here. Sorry.
All right, so it's going to be 2 questions. So first one is, do you know anything how flow state is physiologically or like just biologically different from other states of focus?
Yeah, it has not been studied. It's very difficult to study flow in the brain, because how would you do that? You would have to lie somewhere in a scanner and wait for someone to get into a flow, which is not something you can trigger. So flow hasn't been studied from a neurophysiological point of view, so we don't know, unfortunately.
Yeah, and the second question is about nootropics or any like herbal supplements. Well, Silicon Valley maybe uses the microdosing mushrooms or something like. Is there any supplements kind of worth attention in your opinion?
Caffeine. Caffeine, right? It's a free shot of concentration. It has its negative downsides because you will get tired, and if you compensate that with caffeine as well, you run into a problem. But caffeine is an ideal way to up your concentration for a specific moment in time. So one of the tips that I have in the book is plan your caffeine strategy for a day, and I think everyone has their own caffeine strategy. Some people might be having too much caffeine, which is a bad idea because then you have trouble sleeping or you get really anxious. But caffeine is something. Microdosing has been studied. I think the evidence is mixed when it comes to concentration. It has been studied more in the realm of creativity and that sense, simply because we have caffeine. So I'm not really, and of course people have played around with ADHD medicine, methylphenidate, I don't know the English word, methylphenidate. That also doesn't work for everyone. It also does not only work for people who is diagnosed with ADHD, but it's a skill, right? So there will be people in the ADHD spectrum that get benefits from this ADHD medicine who are not diagnosed with ADHD, but if you test it on a global scale, it doesn't work. But there's a subset of people who probably also in the room who have experienced that for them it helps to get into periods of concentration. So yes, that's not herbs, I get it, but there's no food that can improve your concentration. So eating healthy, of course, is good. What's good for your body is good for your brain. So caffeine, methylphenidate, and a little bit evidence for microdosing, but I think that's still on debate.
We have to finish. It's about time, and there's a lot of information to process. My last question would be, we've been concentrated, listening, have lots of information to process. Would it be more difficult to process if we now go outside and look at our phone immediately?
Yeah. That's probably not the best idea. If you want to hold on to this knowledge, it will be better to ignore your phone. I know how difficult it is, but then it's good to go outside, mind wandering, and write down some of the thoughts, some of the 1 or 2 or 3 things you want to keep in your memory, or you want to write that down immediately. But if you now start to interact with your phone, you might lose that moment.
So it's very important to process information and download
but I also
it
understand that everyone now has a large mental itch. So yeah, it's up to everyone to deal with it.
Okay, well, everybody deal with it like you would. I wonder who's going to look at this phone right like within 5 minutes stepping outside. I think I will. Look at the scores of the football match or the election debate stuff on the news. I thank you very much, Stefan van Stigchel. I think I forgot to mention at the beginning that this was part of the Wellbeing Week, important week for our students with all kinds of workshops and stuff. I'm not sure if it was like one of the last, maybe there's still some activities tomorrow. Look at the Wellbeing Week site of the university to see what's happening. And there's some books, but they're all in Dutch, right, Stefan?
Yeah, sorry.
Yeah, for sale, for the Dutch people. Enjoy your evening. See you back.
See you guys.